Alan Bean was the fourth person to walk on the moon back in 1969, commanded the second mission to Skylab in 1973, and became an incredible artist when he left NASA in the 1980s.
Unfortunately, Alan died back in 2018, but before he died, he was interviewed about his life by Rick Houston. And over the next few weeks, we are going to present to you those interviews.
Do you have any good Alan Bean memories? We'd love to hear them. Tell us via our social media pages at Space and Things Podcast on Threads, Instagram, and Facebook, via the contact form on our website, or by leaving a review on your podcast platform.
And please consider joining us on patreon.com/Space and Things. But right now, it's time for episode 197 of the Space and Things podcast.
Oh my God! Unbelievable! Unbelievable, but it is right this time.
You are listening to the Space and Things podcast with Emily Carney and Dave Giles.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 197 of our podcast. I'm still out doing some music things this week, so we have a very special episode of the podcast in which we're going to be spending some time with Alan Bean. Alan was in the third group of astronauts, but was the last of that group to fly. It was only after fellow classmate Clifton Williams died in a T-38 accident that Al got picked by Pete Conrad to replace him on a crew. And as a result, in 1969, Al became the fourth person to walk on the moon. Later, he commanded a second crewed mission to Skylab, and as we said in the intro, he left NASA to become an artist, painting some incredible pieces to tell the story of what it was like on the moon. He continued with his art right up until his death in 2018.
This episode is possible thanks to Rick Houston, author of two incredible spaceflight books, We'll Stop, The Triumphs and Tragedies of the Space Shuttle Program, and Go Flight, The Unsung Heroes of Mission Control, which he co-wrote with Milt Heflin. In the aftermath of that book, Rick launched the Go Flight podcast back in 2019, and unfortunately, it's no longer online. Part of that podcast included some interviews with Alan Bean, which were conducted a couple of years before he died, and Rick has very kindly allowed us to use them over the next few episodes.
So now here's something I thought I would never say on this podcast, but let's hear from Alan Bean.
He's got it made. Come on in there. 24 feet. Contact light. Roger, copy contact. Clock. Close. It's slow. I get both brakes pushed, Dave. The brakes are closed. Landing. Pete, outstanding, man. Answer on. Beautiful.
Alan, you were born in Texas, is that correct?
I was born in Wheeler, Texas.
Okay.
In 1932. And I was born above a drugstore there. The thing that was interesting about me being born is I was born with two front teeth. And so I made the newspaper. There's not a lot going on up in Wheeler. Wheeler's up at the Panhandle part of Texas. You know, it's west of Oklahoma. My dad came from Michigan, as did my mother, and he had a degree from Michigan State, and he came down here to work for the state of Texas, and he was surveying these different rivers. And at that time in Texas, they were trying to figure out where to build dams, maybe, if they could build them there, and, you know, what kind of dirt was underfoot and all that. And so he was out doing that. And so I was born there, and then we only stayed there a couple of years, so I don't ever remember anything about Wheeler. He then went to work for the U.S. government in the Soil Conservation Service, and we moved then to Minden, Louisiana. And then we were there a number of years and moved to Fort Smith, Arkansas. And then back to Fort Worth, and then to Temple, where I was during the war. He went off in the Army, but my mother and sister, Paula, and I lived there.
It sounds like you moved around a lot. Was that difficult for you to make friends, or was that just something that was part of the deal of being in your family?
I didn't know this at the time, Only later on have I figured this out. I'm at the extreme end of introversion.
Yeah.
So I'm not a guy that goes out and makes friends.
Yeah.
I'm a guy that maybe finds one friend and that's about it. And that friend may have 5 friends, so then I end up with 6 sort of friends, but 1. So I didn't know that at the time, but moving wasn't traumatic, but I did become sort of the outsider in, the latest arrival in any of these schools. That was adding to the basic feature of me being an introvert even today. I think that's one of the reasons I'm an artist. I'm here by myself. I like it. The only person I ever have lunch with is Walt Cunningham, and we have about once a month. In fact, we're going tomorrow to lunch to this hamburger place. And when I was an astronaut, I had, Pete Conrad and maybe one other that I was really friends with. I knew them all, was nice, liked them all. Just wasn't me. I've thought about that. It gave me a slow start as an astronaut. I didn't know this then. But you get flights by being friends with whoever is going to be a commander of a flight.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't do any of that because I don't remember a single time that I asked some other astronaut to go to lunch with. Now, that's a dumb idea. I liked them all, but it wasn't what I did. Now, if I had it to do over again, I would definitely look around and say, well, those in the second group are going to be flying. If I want them to ask me to go fly with them, I better be friendly with them. So I would force myself maybe to drop by Tom Stafford's office, who I liked and admired, and let's go to lunch. You see what I mean? But I don't do that now. It's not me. But you have to change if you're in life. You do too, I'm sure.
What you say is so interesting that you're such an introvert. There's a lot of attention on astronauts to begin with, but you were one of 12 men who walked on the moon, so there was even an additional amount of attention because of that. How difficult was it for you to handle that kind of attention?
I can do that. The difference between an extrovert and an introvert, I've read now, is where do you go when you want to re-energize and feel comfortable? For a guy like me, I go be by myself. I didn't know this. For example, when I was training with Pete and Dick all day long, I never went to dinner with them. I always went to dinner by myself. And then I came back to the hotel and would work on something we had to do by myself. And then whenever the day started, I'd get up and run in the morning by myself. Then when we started work, let's say at 8 o'clock, then give the cars, go over to do it. Then I would do it all day long. But you see, to get reset for the next day, it was necessary for me to just be quiet and be by myself. I wasn't mad at anybody, you see. But and it's a characteristic that I read now that you can't change. You're born these certain ways, some things you can change, but your natural position on this introvert, extrovert, you don't. Other people, like me, they want to get together with somebody all the time. And I've got friends of mine now, not close friends, well now, they hardly ever go anywhere that they don't take somebody with them or go with them. They're happiest that way, and I'm the happiest by myself. It's just a characteristic, but it's not a good characteristic if you want to get selected on a crew.
Yeah.
That's a bad character. Notice that I was out in left field until Pete Conrad decided he's the guy for me. Because if Pete hadn't decided that, the other people wouldn't either, because I wasn't politicking with them or anything.
Right.
Read a couple of books about introversion. I didn't read them until after I left NASA, and it opened my eyes to, because I felt it. Maybe you do. well, something's wrong with me because all these other guys want to get together and go drink beer. I don't want to get together. I want to go home or go back to the hotel room. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Now I realize just the way I am, just the way I was born.
On your website, the alanbean.com, there's a note that says that your mom had the most influence over you as a child. In what ways did she have an impact on you?
Well, she was, first of all, as from 1941, which would be, I was born in 32, from about 9 to maybe 13 or 14, my dad was gone in the Army. World War II. So she was there. And also, my mother was a lot like me. She was very ambitious. She had a lot of energy. And so she was always thinking of things to do, or thinking of things I ought to do. And my dad, who was a more laid-back person, wasn't that way at all. He was the smartest guy in the family by a long shot, but he was just content to, looking back, he was more of an introvert, like me. Maybe not as much, but sort of, although I didn't know it. And so he was quiet, and he didn't say too much, easy to get along with. But my mother, she was the one that was saying, look, Alan, I want you to scrub the floor in the kitchen tomorrow morning. And then she would go in there, and after I did it, and I'd look, she said, well, you didn't get that corner over there. Go do it. Yeah, I would do it, and then she'd say, maybe the next day, we need to wash the woodwork. I want you to wash the... She was a person that was busy herself doing things, and she wanted me to be busy. You see, I didn't like this because my friends would go out and play, and they didn't have to scrub the floor. They didn't have to go hang out the clothes when it was time. I had to do all that. Now, it was such a good deal because then I learned to do all this stuff. I had to iron my own clothes. She wasn't lazy. She thought I needed to learn to iron clothes. So I ironed my clothes. When I got a little older, I had a paper route. She was the one that found the paper route for me. And then I did it. And then maybe it came summer, and she would come home and say, well, I got you working at this company to straighten some equipment there or stock shelves. Suddenly I had a job. So I would have to go do that. And believe me, she wanted stuff done right. She didn't want any half-ass operation. So I learned that. That was a way of life. And I can remember when I was a midshipman. And one time I failed to make muster. I was on a battleship, Wisconsin. I was over in the 16-inch gunhouse looking around, just seeing what was going on, and by myself, notice. So I'm looking around, enjoying that. I forget, I get late. They try to think of something difficult for me to do as punch, but I was always good. But here I made a mistake. So the upperclassmen, they gave me go out on the fantail, clean these garbage cans, all this other stuff. And I had to laugh to myself. This is a piece of cake. You guys can't think of it to make me do that. Isn't easier than what my mother did. That was true all the time. My whole life has been that way. And so I've never been like, boy, this is tough. This is frustrating. I wish I didn't have to do this. It's always been, hey, you don't know what tough is. So she was always lovely. She focused on me, and thank God she did. That's all I can say. And you may have read that story where she changed my life. Well, she changed my life in a long term that way, all right? But she changed my life, and one time I had, and my dad changed my life too. When I was in high school, I wanted to join the Naval Air Reserve over at the Naval Air Station in halfway between Dallas and Fort Worth. And I was just a high school person. Nobody wanted to do that with me, but I wanted to, and I brought the papers home because when I was 17, my mother wouldn't sign the papers. And my dad, then, I heard it from my sister. I didn't know this story. He said, yes, Alan wants to do that. We're going to sign that and let him join the Naval Air Reserve. And so I did join the Naval Air Reserve, and I would go, I had to go over there once a month. And I was just a regular sailor, and helped pilots get in airplanes and wash the airplanes, did all of that sort of stuff. And then that was the first flight in an airplane I ever had, was in a Navy TBM, just like George Bush flew during the war. Of course, I didn't know George Bush or anybody, but I rode up in that ball turret, and I can remember just so exciting to me, particularly when they rendezvoused and other planes were flying along, and I'm in the ball turret looking out, you know.
Wow.
I didn't know anything, but I just really liked it, like the smell of the airplanes, all that other stuff. But to get back to the basic story, if this didn't happen, I would probably go to college at TCU, okay, in town. And they didn't have an engineering school, but that was about it. Live at home, that's all we really could afford. So the NRT, they had an NRTC scholarship exam, and they were going to do it on the, I don't know what, some Saturday morning. And so being the kind of guy I was at that time, the kind of boy I was, I'm sleeping. My mother comes in and says to me, well, Alan, weren't you getting up and going down to take the NRTC exam? I said, yeah, Mom, but I probably wouldn't pass it anyway. She said, you need to get up and go take it. And
wow.
Of course, I argued with her. She said, I'll drive you downtown. Now, my mother never drove me anywhere. She believed I should either walk or catch a bus. That was her way, as you can just imagine from what I've said.
Yeah.
So for her to say, I'll drive you downtown was a big deal. So it got me out of bed. I went down, took the exam, I passed. Then I went to the interview, and I've always thought the two things that got me in the NROTC at the University of Texas, which changed my whole trajectory of my life, was her getting me out of bed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done that. I can tell you now, I wouldn't have done it if she hadn't got me out of bed. I wouldn't have gone to the University of Texas. I wouldn't have been in the NROTC. I wouldn't have had an aeronautical engineering degree. I wouldn't have learned all the things that I learned there by getting away with from the people I hung out with in Fort Worth that weren't all that interested in anything except just having a good time, because that's all I was interested in. But I get to the University of Texas, and these people in the dorm there, they're interested in making good grades, things like that. I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in finding myself a girlfriend or something like that. It was my junior year before I finally woke up.
Wow.
And then when I woke up and concentrated, I was good. But I didn't do that. And so I've told you fundamentally why my mother, I think of her as the dominant influence in my life.
Okay.
And thank God she was.
Now, when did you join the Naval Reserves? What year would you have been in high school?
17, when I became, okay, I was born in 32, that would be 49.
Okay.
The minute I got to be 17, then I wanted to be in the Navy. I wanted to be around airplanes. My dream, back when I was 10, was to be a pilot. And then my dream actually changed to be a Navy pilot, because I thought then that Navy pilots were better than other pilots because they could land on aircraft carriers. So I wanted to be, the best pilot. So I want to be a Navy pilot. That's not true, by the way, but that's what I thought as a high schooler. I found out there's, like most other things, there's good and bad Marines, Army, Air Force, Navy too. And any of these other pilots could learn to land on aircraft here if they just took a month and practiced like we had to. So that wasn't what I thought then.
Okay. Now, you said that you had wanted to be a pilot since the age of 10. What was it? Did you see?
I think it was just looking in the movies.
Okay.
And saying, wow, that guy flying that airplane in the movies looks like it's heroic. He's having a lot of fun. That looks just like something I'd like to do. None of my friends had any interest in, this is college too, had any interest in being in the military or flying airplanes. They all advised me that was a bad idea. I should become a lawyer or maybe a doctor or a businessman or something. But I wasn't tuned into that. And somehow I held on to my dream. And it's made all the difference in my life. And I've advised young people when I talk with them, that's what they've got to think. And you're lucky if you've got a dream. By the way, a lot of people don't have dreams. I hope you've had one and are living it. But it's made all the difference in my life. I gave a speech up in Rome, New York last week. You know, people walk up and they'll tell me they want to be an astronaut or they want to be something and they're in college. I'll say, well, gosh, that's good. I think what'd you do today to get closer to that dream? Well, I didn't do anything today because of such and such. What'd you do this week? No, well, I didn't have a chance. I'm too busy. Yeah. I say, you haven't got a dream. You just got a wish. You want a dream, then you got to do something every day.
Yeah.
Or every week. I do something every day to be a better artist, period. Even when I'm flying up to Rome to give a speech, I'm reading notes and things about art.
Now, you mentioned your sister Paula, and from the website, the picture on the website, she's younger than you?
She's 2 years younger than I am.
Okay.
And wonderful. She was the smart one in the family. I went along and made B's and C's, occasional D in high school. I never took a book home in high school. Never had a study hall. I always had to work. I always left school at noon. So all my courses were in the morning. And then I left school at noon and went to work. Like I said, in a hardware supply, stacking shelves or something. Then I had a paper route, then later. But I was apparently smart enough without studying or anything and not even paying that much attention in class because I didn't have any desire to do anything more than just get by.
Now, as a brother, were you a master tormentor like I was to my little brother, or were you a protector?
No, I was not. What I was, I believe, is she was a lot more serious than I was. She made all plays. I think she made 1 B in high school for our whole school thing. And so I was kind of jealous of her. In our family, you knew your parents loved you, but they didn't, or maybe didn't even know for sure. They never said, I never had somebody in my family, extended family or anything say to me, you know, you're really smart. You make these grades without bringing books home. You could be anything you wanted to be. No one ever said that to me, ever in my life. And so, I think there was then competition with me with my sister. You know, you see what I mean? She's making all A's. I'm not. Of course, I'm not studying. But do you see it still? I don't think I would say I had love for my sister. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't dislike her, but I didn't think of her. I do now. I have a lot of love for my sister, but then I don't think I had love within me. In order to say you got to have love to give it, I believe it. So I didn't have that in me. It just wasn't there. I didn't know. Nobody put it in there, and it wasn't there. And it was only later on that I began to understand this and had a lot of self-love. And then I didn't have any, I feel a lot of love. That's how I feel all the time, really.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Alan, I don't know how to ask the question, but your middle name is Laverne. Was
my grandfather's first name.
Was that ever something that other kids gave you a hard time about?
Probably. I don't remember that. That's not a thing that kids gave me the kids that I remember gave me a hard time about was my ears, which maybe stick out as much now, but they seem to stick or stuck out more then or something, or at least I thought they did.
Yeah.
So I would say that. Another thing that I look back on is kind of teasing is I told you we weren't a poor family, but we didn't have a lot. So I always wore tennis shoes, because they were cheap, and then I went barefoot in the summer. And so I had a nickname that was Tennis Shoes. Now, it didn't bother me, but looking back on it, I can see it was a little bit strange. When I went off to college, I had 2 pair. Now, maybe I had something else, okay, but this is how I remember it. 2 pair of seersucker pants, because they were the only kind that were wash and wear. And I had 2 shirts that I remember. Maybe I had 3, It's hard to remember those things. But I do remember that every day before I went to bed, I took my pants into the shower and into the dorm room and washed them and auto up on these little things that held them for the cuffs. And it kind of made them look good.
Yeah.
In the same way with the shirt. They were washed away. And then I wore the next shirt and pants the next day. And that went on. Maybe I missed a day. I didn't get, I'm not that dirty. I don't have to wash. But those were the clothes that I had in college. I don't remember ever going to town and buying a shirt or pants or anything like that. I'd get them for Christmas maybe or something. I didn't seem like I didn't have things. I'm explaining to you the way I thought about things then. And so I never was ashamed of what I wore, but looking back, because other kids were kind of like this. And other kids in the dorm, some weren't, but many were. So it didn't seem strange to me. Besides, I didn't care. I was interested in girls and just hanging, that sort of thing. So I was okay.
You were born squarely in the middle of the Depression.
Yes.
Was that something that impacted your family a lot, or would you consider yourself, somebody that got through it in relatively good shape?
I'd say we got through it in relatively good shape because my dad had his job, but he was not highly paid. He was not the kind of person to try to move up the chain of things. So he never did. Even though he was the smartest person I would run into, I've run into a few smarter, not many. He just wasn't ambitious. He was not an ambitious person. Very content with his job, very content to come home, do whatever my mom asked him to do. If she wanted him to do something, he would do it. But then when I was finished, he'd sit down and have a cigarette, drink coffee, and read a book. And he would read my textbooks when I brought him home from college. I can remember from coming home from college and thinking to myself, well, I know some words now in engineering or something. I'm going to ask him what they mean. I'll show how smart I am. Mm-hmm. So I'd say, Dad, what does this mean? I learned it in something. Who knows where? He had Latin in college or somewhere, and he'd think about it a while and say, And I don't remember ever coming up with a word he didn't know what it meant. And my favorite story may be in one of those books. I go home from college and I've been playing, instead of studying, ping pong, because there's a ping pong table down there in the dormitory. I lived in the dormitory all the years I was there. And so I was pretty good ping pong. We're going to play ping pong. The guy next door, a friend of mine, played full church. He had a son my age named Clay. My son's name was Clay. So anyway, we go to play ping pong next door. So I'm playing ping pong. My dad hasn't played ping pong, who knows when. And so he keeps returning the ball to me. And eventually I lose. And we play another game. And I lose. And then we play another game and I lose. And then we're in the garage where this ping pong table is. And over there is ceramic tile. It was for their kitchen. They had one left over sitting out. He takes this ceramic tile and he plays me. He's got holding it like this. He beats me. Here I am, a really good ping pong player. And he beats me with this ceramic tile in his hand. That was my dad right there.
Wow.
He was content with what he had, what he was doing. That was him. That was my dad. By the way, that's more my sister now, and during her career. And I've been more like my mother, not as smart as my dad, but I had all this ambition and energy to be great at whatever it was. Like I want to be a great artist. I'm not a great artist, but I work at it all the time to be better. Here I am, 84, and I'm trying to be a better artist. It's almost a waste of time. Della said, you get your note and then you stick to it. I've never been able to do that. It's just not me. When I was flying, I teased about this by Bill Anders, is I always wanted to fly the perfect flight, where you take off, you lift off at the right airspeed, you level off perfectly and all that. And I think in all those years of flying, I was a pretty good pilot, but I only came close to flying a perfect flight 2 or 3 times. I didn't fly the perfect flight, but I came close enough, But you see, I was always trying to do it. I think that's been one of the things that's worked out for me. I've always been struggling to be better, even though I don't have to be better. It's just something about me. Maybe it's a feeling of inferiority long ago and wanting to be better.
You walked away from your flights. That was good enough.
Yeah, I did. Well, not for me, it wasn't, apparently.
Wow.
I never had an aircraft accident, and I had a lot of opportunities to have. Of course, I had luck. I had some opportunities and got lucky.
Now, at what point did art enter the picture? Was that something you enjoyed as a child, drawing, or did that develop later?
It developed later. Now, here's what I think, looking back. I was always an arty person. I always cared a lot about how things looked. When I built model airplanes in high school and junior high, I built the ones that looked the best to me. And same way with a lot of other things. When I bought my first car after college, I didn't care, even though I was an engineer, I didn't care anything about the engineering. I bought a Chevrolet Impala that was turquoise and white because I thought it was the best looking car. So in the background, when I flew airplanes, I always wanted to fly the ones that looked the best, that looked like they were going a million miles an hour. And fortunately, in aeronautical engineering, you find out generally the ones that look the best fly the best.
Yeah.
Not perfect, but generally. And then when I was a test pilot and flying in the Navy, flying all the planes, flying the good ones and the bad ones, I think subconsciously my brain said, this is as good as your childhood dream is going to get. This is the greatest job in the world. That's the way I felt every day. For a guy like me, this is the best job. So I never did have to say, this is, probably did say as good as it gets. But I think when it went into my subconscious mind, then I began looking around at art. And the thing that occurred was, one neighbor, there was a good pilot friend of mine, they bought this painting that I liked. Wasn't really a very good painting now that I know something, but then I thought it looked great. I thought to myself, I can do that. And so I bought some art materials and tried to do it. I did it sort of. So then I enrolled in night school at, when I was a test pilot there at St. Mary's College, it was called, near that, where the test pilot test center was in Maryland. It was in Limited-town, Maryland. I sort of liked it, but I certainly never thought I would ever become an artist. And that wasn't what I thought. And so they soon left there and went to Jacksonville in a squadron. I took art, I think, from a teacher in the neighborhood. I was interested. It was my hobby on Saturday and Sunday. Saturday and Sunday, I would maybe do something simple, copy a painting I liked, that sort of thing. When I was at NASA, by then I built an easel for myself, and I still have it over there. I don't use it, but I still have it. And I would take from people in the neighborhood when I had the chance. I enrolled in night school when I was between missions at the Museum of Fine Arts Night School, which was just in a house downtown, and they had a nice building now. But I liked it enough so that I thought of it as my hobby. For example, when I was training, I never thought of art. When I was on the moon, I never thought of art. Never thought of art in Skylab. You see, they were separate, not anything that was for the future or anything, you know. Then whenever I was looking around, I was training to fly the space shuttle. We're ahead, but we can go back eventually. I looked around, you know, and I said, now look, I'm enjoying this. I've enjoyed training here for the shuttle, but if I'm going to make a change to something, I'm getting older now. This was maybe 1982. So 82, and I was born in 32. So I'm saying to myself, you know, I can stay and fly the shuttle. If I am going to change to do something else, so I began thinking, well, I'll probably go to work for Grumman or something. No, I don't want to do that. I'd rather stay here. And then I thought, you know, the thing that I'm doing on the weekends, not making any money, but I like it, is being an artist. Maybe if I could learn to be a good artist, which I like to do, then I could paint my experiences on the moon and become the first artist in all of history to go anywhere else but the Earth.
Yeah.
And even though I'm not that good at it, maybe I could learn to be better. And so that was kind of the way art evolved for me. Then the minute I began to think, this may be a good idea, because I could look around and say, there's men and women here that can fly the shuttle as good as I can or better. However, I'm the only guy that had the luck to walk on the moon that's interested in fine art, and I can tell stories that would be lost otherwise. So I'm a guy that does his duty. I do my duty all through my life. My mother probably taught me that. Alan, you need to do what you're supposed to about mopping this floor. You see, so I'm that way now, by the way. I'm always that way. And so I thought, you know, it's really my duty, in a way, to quit being an astronaut and go do this other thing Because if I do this other thing, I'm the only person on earth that can do it, that will do it, where there's all these other people here that can do this other job, and they can do it as good or better. Believe it, NASA's never missed me. But none of these paintings, that painting on your wall up there wouldn't be there. And maybe you've got a few others, they wouldn't be there. Some of these stories that I tell are the way that people will remember, because most people are not going to go back and read these reports. They just aren't. They're going to see, I hope, these paintings someday in museums, maybe. I won't be around to know. And they'll read the story that goes with them. And astronauts do. Astronauts know all these. When they go back to the moon, they'll remember that painting I did. Are you ready for some football? They'll take a football. And that sort of thing. So I'm doing what I like to do. But at the same time, I'm doing what I ought to be doing. I'm using up my life. I've used up 30 years here or so of my life, 34 really, of my life doing this, or 33 or whatever it is. I left in 83, so it'll be 33 doing this thing. So I'm a guy that's now careful about what he uses his life up doing.
Yeah.
Because at 84, there's not a good percentage left. But still, I plan to use my afternoon up over here trying to do a painting of John Young and Charlie Duke looking in a crater. Right now, it needs to be more colorful. But you see,
yeah.
And I'm not carelessly doing it because I got nothing else to do. Because I can stop and make a hell of a lot more money speaking and promoting myself as a speaker, because I was good at that.
Hey, Trumpet, we read you loud and clear, and for your info, Flipper got a visual on you, and he also picked up Surveyor. Hey, Oscar, hey, where are we?
So obviously the first interview we've presented on this podcast where we haven't actually done the interview. But Emily, how did you feel when you listened to that first part of the Alan Bean interview?
Oh, gosh. Well, my first impressions were, the surface impressions were, it was like listening to an old friend talk. When I cut on the file that you sent me, I was like, I was almost in tears just because I was like, oh God, I miss that voice so much. I miss that Texas accent and that friendliness, and that there's just a lack of ego there that really comes through. Oh, at the end of part 1, Rick is talking to him, and Alan Bean's like, Alan. I feel weird calling him Alan because I wasn't on a friendly, I wasn't like BFFs with him or anything. But he's like, oh, it's a pleasure. And I'm like, this is the 4th man to walk on the moon. Like, but yet he's telling someone else, oh, it's a pleasure to talk to you anytime, and I missed that. He's been gone since 2018, which is really, it's 6 years now, almost, I think, but it just doesn't seem that long. It's weird. I just feel like, I don't mean to be depressing. I really don't, but we've lost a lot of those Apollo guys in the last 5 years. And it's just with each of those guys, it's just a chunk, just a big chunk of not just space history, but it's just sort of a chunk of our humanity is gone in a way, because all of these guys were a little different. It's funny because this interview, I think, solidified, the part 1 of the interview sort of solidified my feeling that Bean was a little different among the Apollo astronauts. I think he identifies why at the very beginning, because he calls himself an introvert. And at first, I was like, introvert? Like, I've met Alan Bean before, and that wasn't what I thought about him. He is very outgoing. He's very good with people. He's very friendly. When I think of introvert, I have a sort of a preset. I think of Sheldon from Big Bang. I have sort of a preconception of who an introvert is. But honestly, it makes a lot of sense in a way, because I think the way Alan Bean means that term isn't somebody who's uncommunicative or, shy or something like that. I think the way he means it is somebody who's perhaps more introspective and who's okay with being by themselves. they don't have to be around a million people all the time. There are people who, I don't want to mention no names, but there are astronauts who I feel want to be around people constantly. And I don't think Bean was necessarily like that.
Well, I remember when this interview first aired back in 2019 when it was on the Go Flight podcast, which unfortunately is no longer there, which is why I asked Rick if we could use these interviews. And that really struck me. The whole introvert thing really struck me because he's explaining what it means to be an introvert and the difference between introvert and extrovert in a way I'd never heard before. And it made me do a lot of research about it. And in essence, the preconceived idea of what we think introverts are, being socially awkward and not wanting to ever talk to anyone, isn't actually true. That isn't what the definition of an introvert is. The definition is someone who, when they want to recharge their batteries, does that by being alone. Whereas the definition of an extrovert is someone who when they want to recharge their batteries, wants to do that with other people or can do that with other people. So that was an eye-opener to me, a huge eye-opener to me, and it explained a lot about my own personality, which I found absolutely fascinating as someone who lived on their own for so long and is often craving moments just to be on my own, even though I'm very social. And a lot of people have misdiagnosed people as being introverted or extroverted without understanding what those terms mean. So I was glad that Alan talked about those things and helped me understand them, which I wasn't expecting when I first heard an interview with Alan Bean. I wasn't expecting the interview to go that way. But it does explain a lot. I think that whole only ever having lunch with Walt Cunningham last year's before he's died, and when he was an astronaut, never having dinner or lunch with any of them, doing his work and then needing to go home and just be by himself, whereas the others might have been having a beer or just having a catch up. As soon as he was finished, he was gone. He was like, no, I'm off on my own.
I'm out of here.
It wasn't necessarily even about being with his family or anyone else. It was just, I need to be on my own. And I found that side of it. Oh, right. Yes, that adds up to a lot, not just for me, but I've seen that pattern of behavior in other people, and now I understand it. So for me, that part of the interview was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, same here. And I think we tend to use the word introvert as sort of a slur, almost like a slam, like, oh, this person's an introvert and they don't talk a lot. That's not really the case, because if you'd met Alan Bean, I wouldn't have pegged him as a classic introvert. But the way he explains it does make a lot of sense, and it was fascinating. And it kind of jives. There's this story, and you probably remember this. I think it was in the movie In the Shadow of the Moon. I think it was that movie. It was one of those space documentaries that came out some years back, and it was about all the Apollo astronauts. I could be misquoting it, but he was talking about coming back to Earth after Apollo 12, and just appreciating going to the mall by himself and getting some ice cream or something, and just sitting and watching people. And he described Earth as like a Garden of Eden compared to the moon. And that was always like a quote that really got me, because I'm like, he was on the mission with the all big personalities, with Pete Conrad and Dick Gordon. Those guys you could hear from a mile away. Like, I've met Dick Gordon. You knew if he was around. You could hear him. And it's just funny that they were on the same crew, but I think Alan Bean may have gotten something a little different out of it. I don't know. I just think it was a fascinating conversation.
Well, there's some great stories in there as well. The story about his mum and dad, and how his mum drove him to the test, even though she never drove him anywhere, and how that absolutely would why he ended up where he was all because of that one little moment, and how it changed his life. And the other one I really enjoyed was towards the end, when he was saying how he was trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. He was training for the shuttle, and he said, NASA wouldn't miss him. NASA's not going to miss me. Yeah, they've got other people who could fly the shuttle as well, probably better than me, but no one could paint those pictures. And he said it considered it his duty. And I found that bit really special.
I love that.
My duty to the only person on Earth who could paint the pictures of what it's like to be on the moon and tell that story. And he wanted to use up his life, even though there wasn't going to be much left of it, as he said, to do that. And I found that really powerful. And also, we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. I quoted it because I was working on this episode a couple of weeks ago. But that whole, most people just have a wish. But if you dream about doing something, then you should be doing something for that dream every day or every week to try and make it happen. That was so powerful. And wow, I was sitting there thinking, oh man, yeah, that's I've fallen short of that a few times, and I need to put that up on the wall somewhere and remind myself that I need to be doing things. It doesn't have to be big, but you've got to always be working towards your dreams if you want them to make them happen.
Exactly, and I no matter how big or small too, because I mean, we talked to another Apollo era astronaut earlier this week. I don't want to run it too much for the future listeners. Yeah, I think he talked about something, not the same thing, but he basically talked about making goals and achieving them and things like that. And he was talking about sort of the little twists and turns in one's life that allow somebody to make their goals. Like this person went to school, and that's kind of what set him on a path to become an astronaut. He wasn't consciously thinking, oh, I'm going to go and become an astronaut, because that job did not exist back then. But a choice that he made kind of put him on that path, if that made sense. And I think it's the same thing with Alan Bean. There was no, back when he first started going to school, and he talks about this in this interview, he got more serious in college about education. He in high school and earlier, he got B's and C's. He didn't really care, but he got, here's my go to school kids speech in this podcast. In college, he got a little more serious about education because, he saw, okay, this is what I have to do. My dream is to become a pilot. I got to buckle down if I want to have this kind of job. I got to buckle down and study and learn it and everything like that. And I feel like that little twist and turn caused by his mama taking him to go take this test, it may have taken over 20 years or so, but that led to him directly walking on the moon. Just think about it. It did. I mean, for real. So it's like that stuff you have to think about is like each little sequential step in your life. It may seem insignificant, but it might lead to something, you achieving a dream, whatever that dream is. It doesn't have to be walking on the moon. That's just, I think everybody has their personal walking on the moon. Everybody's got that personal moment, which is the equivalent to their moonwalk. It doesn't have to be a moonwalk, but for Alan Bean, it ended up being that. I don't know. That's what I got out of this interview, and I just miss him. He's just a tremendously inspirational. I hate this term because whenever I hear the term inspirational, you think of dumb posters in a doctor's office or something. It just, sometimes it lacks real substance or meaning, but really, he is an inspirational figure to listen to because this is somebody who
was born in a town in the middle of nowhere in Texas with 2 front teeth. Who ended up walking on the moon. I mean, it's quite the story, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if anyone's ever in Wheeler, head down to the Alan Bean Memorial Museum that they've got there, which is really, really a special little place. Even though he wasn't there for very long in his life, the town have certainly embraced him. And why not? Because anyone from that town can now look up to the guy that was born there, just above the shop in downtown, and end up walking on the moon. So, of course, we don't have any video of this. So if you're on our Patreon page, unfortunately, there's no full unedited video to watch. But if you want to know more about Rick and go and say thank you to Rick for letting us use these interviews, please do.
Thank you, Rick.
His social media stuff will be in the show notes, which you can find in the description of this podcast in your podcast provider or by going to spaceandthingspodcast.com. That's it for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. It's a real privilege to be able to share these Alan Bean interviews with you, and we are incredibly grateful to Rick for allowing us to use them.
Thank you all for listening to. This is part 1 of 3 parts with Alan Bean. So tune in next week for part 2. But until then, don't forget, in space, no one can hear you me.
Thanks for listening to the Space and Things podcast. Back next Thursday with a brand new episode.